Hi, this is Casey with Feed Lubbock, and this is Steven. And today we're going to talk about some of the decisions that you need to consider before purchasing land for your tiny house.
Okay, the first on the list is access to your land. The reason this is important is because you need to be able to bring in your building equipment and materials. No access means no building, or a longer trek, and makes it much more difficult. Second on the list, the location of your land. You need to consider the weather, which includes the summers, winters, and growing seasons. Do you like hot and arid? Do you like mild and cooler temperatures? How long is the growing seasons? Here in Lubbock, and the summers are hot, but it's only hot for like 8 to 12 weeks, and then the winters are really long and severe.
We have about 4 months.
Yeah, winters here are about 4 to 6 months. The growing season, are you going to need to have a greenhouse to extend a short growing season? Or can you get by with just growing your vegetables and produce in raised beds? That's a very important decision.
When we lived in the Gulf Coast, the summers were a lot different than they were. Our growing season was probably about 8 months, and our summers were really humid and wet, whereas here in Lubbock, our summers are really dry, windy. I think they call it a haboo, comes along every once in a while, which is like a giant dust cloud. The winters here, it snows a couple of times a year. Most of the time it's just a few inches, but you know, every once in a while they have a blizzard that shuts down and it's feet. So you need to consider that also with where you want to buy land. The growing season, like I said, in the Gulf Coast was 8 months. It's 6 months here. So you need to consider ways you're going to extend your growing season. I think Steven said that. You can do hoop houses, greenhouses, even tunnel covers, or, you know, plant cut freeze cloth could extend your growing season depending on where you are, anywhere from a few weeks to a few months.
Number 3, do you have access to utilities? This depends on you. Are you going completely off-grid, using solar power, wind power, or would you rather have city or county services and be connected to their water, their sewer, and also connected to electricity and internet? Electricity can be expensive depending on how far you have to bring it out to your land. That could be very costly. So you need to consider these very carefully. For us and our little farmstead, we are required to be connected to the city water and the city sewer. And we're fine with that. Other people, they would prefer being totally off-grid. Electricity, we have an option. We could either go solar or we could be connected to the power pole. Lucky for us, they just put in a new power pole right behind our back fence on our farmstead. So that's really not going to cost. So right for now, we're going to be connected to public utility. And Casey, she can't live without internet. For me, that's fine. Or, you know, I could go either way. I could live out in the middle of nowhere with no access to electricity, sewer, water, or internet.
Internet is necessary for our business, and electricity, we're at least going to leave. Whenever we go, we will go partially solar and have a hybrid. And the reason is because I still want electricity for the things that pull condenser units. Like the kitchen, you have your fridge, it always pulls a little bit when the compressor kicks on. That pulls quite a bit of a charge, and I wouldn't want the solar system totally drained. We'd have to have a larger solar system. So instead, we're just going to go with a smaller solar system and have that part of the house connected directly to the electricity. If it gets to a point where they get unreasonable or the rates get ridiculous, we can always expand the solar system and go totally solar. Internet, it's part of our business. There's no way around not having internet, so that is something that is like the first thing I looked into when we bought where we did.
Another thing you need to consider is, can you live in an RV while you're building your tiny house or your homestead? For us, living in an RV, we've done that for 4 or 5 years. I actually really enjoyed it, but the city or the town where our farmstead is located, they don't allow us to live in an RV on our own land while we're building. So living in an RV is not an option, which we have to be creative now. So we live in Lubbock, which is 35 miles away, and the largest town closest to our farmstead, while we're building out our homestead.
Yeah, it's just a 45-minute drive. Sometimes it seems longer, but we're always in a hurry to see the farm, so it doesn't ever seem like that long of a drive, especially on the way in. There are RV parks if we ever decide to purchase another RV and decide that we'd rather live there in town while we're building, and we could purchase an RV and put it in. I think there's 2 RV parks in town. There's also a place that you can camp for free for 2 days, and then it's $10 a day, sponsored by the city. I mean, that's also an option, but we're just not to that point yet. So we'd rather just live in the city, drive the 45 minutes whenever we want to work on the property. We know that that's going to change once we get more and more out there, and the fence and the farm animals. We do plan on making the transition and moving out to the property at that point.
Another consideration that you need to keep in mind is access to jobs and civilization. Civilization, farmers markets, neighbors, a large city or a medium city. The reason for this, if you or your spouse is still working, it makes things easier. The closer it is to a larger town, the less commuter time and expense on gasoline, diesel, wear and tear on your vehicle. Civilization, if you're growing your fruits, vegetables, chickens, goats, how close are you to the nearest farmer's market? You don't want to be driving an entire day just to be able to get to a farmer's market. To me, that is not economical, and I feel that we would be losing money. Where our homestead is between 2 farmers markets, and we're going to try to start one in the small town that where our farm is located, because there's not one out there. So either way, the worst case scenario, we're 35 miles away from 2 farmers markets.
Yeah, the other thing you want to consider is that even if you don't plan on getting a job in the nearest town, and like Steven said, it's like you don't want to be driving forever to the farmer's market, you also want to consider how far will you have to go for people who do have the expendable income to be able to afford your CSA or whatever that you plan on selling at the farmer's market. And is it going to be cost effective for you if you have to drive 2 hours one way just to sell things, just to sell stuff at the farmer's market? At that point, you're going to have to, at the least, purchase like something to be able to pack all of that up, because you're not going to want to go with just a handful of items, because it's going to be such a large distance and such an expense for you to be able to go just to sell some of the things that you'd like to at the farmer's market.
Another important thing that you may want to consider is access to medical services. There's several reasons for that. If you happen to have a medical emergency while working on your homestead, how far is the nearest hospital and the nearest ambulance to get you, to transport you to the hospital? Some cases, if it's a life and death injury, time is a factor. Because, there may not be time to transport you 2 to 4 hours to the nearest hospital. Access to doctors. If anyone becomes ill, you don't want the same situation, having to drive one way to the doctor's office, 1 to 4 hours. That would not be feasible. For us, we're lucky enough, and we didn't realize it until just a couple of months ago, that where our homestead is, where we bought, we're only about 4 blocks from a state-of-the-art hospital in the small town, which we would have never thought in the small town of Crosbyton they would even have a state-of-the-art hospital with a helipad. So that makes us feel comfortable. It makes me feel real comfortable, because accidents do happen, and accidents happen when you least expect them.
Yeah, and the facility also has a clinic next door to the hospital, so it's very convenient. I've actually already changed them as my doctor, and even though it's a small town, the care that I got at the clinic was actually better than any care that I've gotten in any large city that I've been in. That includes Lafayette, Houston. I've gone to the hospital, and I've actually had to go to a facility for respiratory infection in Denton, which is outside of Dallas. One time in Austin, one time in San Marcos, and in Lafayette. So I've been to a number of facilities and have quite a few experiences to be able to compare to say that I was very surprised. They exceeded my expectations. I didn't expect it to be care to be that good. I expected it to be just above vet level, and that was not the case.
And the important thing, the reason that to me, it's important for the hospital being that close, is because on our farmstead, it's right on the edge of the county, right on the edge of the town. There's a lot of rattlesnakes and other poisonous snakes that roam around the properties, and in that situation, if you get bit, time is a major factor.
In addition to wild boar, and we have coyotes and other things.
Wolves.
On occasion, they will get rabies or get some kind of disease, go crazy, and attempt to attack someone. We'd rather prepare for the worst and expect the best than, it to be the other way around, to be unprepared.
Another important factor is just how much land do you need. For some, it could be 1,000 acres. Others, it could be 10,000 acres. For someone else, it could be a quarter of an acre. Us, we're perfectly happy with almost a half an acre of land. With that, we can do quite a bit. We can have several greenhouses, some orchards, raise chickens, have a small farmhouse, including a barn and a workshop, and that's perfect for us. Other people, it may not be that great, but it just depends on how you manage your land and how you use your land. and just how much work do you want to be doing on a daily basis?
We decided to start small and see what we could do. My grandparents actually had he had a dozen chickens and a thriving vegetable garden with his house on a city lot. So he had that half of a city lot, which probably in Louisiana is like 50 feet by probably 150 feet, maybe 100 feet. Half of that was his home, and the other half he used it to have his chickens and vegetables on. And we have more than that. So I figure if he could do it by himself with the grandkids helping out every once in a while, it shouldn't be a problem with the two of us.
Another thing that you need to consider is what is your budget and how much are you willing to pay for land. There's some areas around the country where land is very expensive. For us, in our location in Texas in the South Plains, the farther away you get from Lubbock, which is considered a major city, the cheaper the land is. But the closer you get into Lubbock, the more expensive it is. Our land, for the half an acre, we paid less than $6,000 for our half an acre, which I find that to be very reasonable. If we bought the same amount of land in Lubbock, it would be $25,000 to $75,000, and that's just for land. So it really depends on your budget and how much you're willing to pay for your property.
I don't have anything.
Along with that, another thing you need to consider is property taxes. Do you really want to buy your land in an area that has really high property tax? We chose not to. In Crosbyton, property taxes are extremely low, which is fine for us. That really helps us out. Others, they want a better location for their property, and you may as well. You want a better location. But taxes, eventually, even if your homestead is paid for, they can make you feel like you're in a long-term mortgage for as long as you own your land. And taxes do keep going up every year, so you want to do a lot of research and be very careful where you buy your land. Another thing and the last thing I want to talk about that you may want to consider is permits and zoning. How is the area zoned? Is it zoned for business? Is it zoned for residential? Is it zoned for agriculture? How much do building permits cost? Some areas, those can be very restricted and very expensive. Our area where our homestead is not. Our homestead is zoned as agriculture, light industrial, residential. So we can have a business, we can raise things agriculturally, animals, vegetables, fruits, and we can have our residents on there. To us, that's very important. And the permit fee is not that bad. The permit fee, I think now they just raised it from $10 to $150, which is still not that bad. Versus where we had looked before in Louisiana, the permit fee was like $585 just for a building permit. The Houston area building permit was $1,500. So it just depends, where you want to buy your land at. That's very important to consider, and how restrictive and how zoning can be. You may find the perfect piece of land, but it may be only zoned to be wild, where you can't have a homestead, you can't farm, you can't grow anything. Or it may be residential, where you're not allowed to have anything other than a residence. So it's very important to look into. Anything else?
No, I know we talked more about HOAs, but you definitely need to check out that video and check and see if there's any deed restrictions or anything else that may, be required for you to live there. I mean, at least know what you're getting into. If you're happy dealing with what the restrictions are, like you must build, there's the new thing that's coming out for some of these buildings to try to inhibit tiny houses is they have a minimal building code of like 1,600 square feet. That's something that's new, that's being implemented by some of the HOAs and some of the new building codes. You might want to make sure that that is not the case before you spend money purchasing and find out that it's not going to meet your needs. That's it.
That's it.
So goodbye.
So I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a lot. If you have any questions, you can email us. You can leave a comment, and we'll see you again.
Thank you. Goodbye.